name's Eden. I'm a plus size yoga instructor, and two questions that I get asked from other plus size yogis very often are, what are these and how do you use them? I'm aware that was two questions, but those are not the two questions. And the second question is, how do you step through when you have a barrier stopping you from getting where you're trying to go? In this video, I'm going to answer those two questions and also give you some demos. Hopefully this will help you in your public classes and during your at-home practice. So let's get started. This is a yoga block. Yoga blocks come in a few different forms. This is a thicker yoga block. They also come half the width of this. This is also a cork block. Cork is what you see in most studios because they are antimicrobial. They also are a bit heavier and more stable. You also have foam blocks, which are foam. I think they're a little bit better for restorative yoga. They can be a little bit, depending on the foam block, less trustworthy when it comes to things like half moon or balancing poses because they don't have the sturdy base like a cork or a bamboo block might have, but they all have their use. If you're doing something like a heart opener where you're laying on a block, a foam block is going to be a lot more comfortable than a cork block. But the three main functions of a yoga block, the first is to take pressure off of your wrist. The second function is to bring the ground closer to you. So, for example, if I'm reaching for the ground and I'm this far away, but I have a block here, now the ground is where I need it to be in order to get to my forward fold or whatever it may be. And the third function is to create more space between you and the floor. So for something like stepping through that we're going to talk about in this video, a block can be very helpful. However, I know that blocks can sort of get in the way during your practice. They can complicate things in public classes, so I am going to show you the way that I prefer to step through in classes that just works for me, and some alternatives as well. So let's go ahead and get started with the first use of yoga blocks, taking pressure off of your wrist. So I have my yoga blocks here. If you place your hands on the ground, you may notice a little bit of pressure in your wrist. But using this surface, it takes a little bit of the pressure off because it's a little bit of a softer surface, or you being able to grip it versus relying on your hand for stability can give you a lot more comfort during yoga. But I do want to mention, you may have a little bit of a more sensitive wrist, but you may not be distributing the weight properly through your hands. So the problem may not be your wrist at all. It may be how you're engaging your hands. So I see this a lot in classes. I walk by people and I can see that their fingers are curled. If you're doing that, your fingers aren't taking any of the pressure. The back of your wrist is taking all of the pressure. So that might be the cause of your wrist pain if you're not pressing your fingers all the way into the mat. And this does take some practice to get used to engaging your fingers. At work, we type all day. So when I ask you to place your hands down, your fingers almost automatically go to the form of typing. So how I like to practice keeping my hands down. One, I like to think of a suction cup in my palm. So I place my hands down and then pull up on my palms just a little bit. That way you start to feel the weight all the way through your hands. This method works for some people. For other people, placing your hand down and then focusing on pushing this first bone into the ground helps a lot of people engage their full hand. And then when you shift forward and let your hands take on more weight, you'll notice that the weight is more evenly distributed throughout your hands. So if that helps with your wrist pain, you may not need the assistance of blocks. Now we're going to talk about how to bring the ground closer to you using blocks. So this size of blocks, you can use them 3 ways. So I have them kind of on the medium height here. You can also pop them down to use them even a lower height. So if you're just a little bit from the floor, and then you can pop them up this way too if you need a lot more distance from the floor. So forward folds is a good way to demonstrate how blocks can bring the floor closer to you. So for a forward fold, if I couldn't reach the ground, I could bend down, and this is the ground now. It's brought the ground from the floor about 4 inches up closer to me. That way I can have my palms all the way on the ground, I can relax my head and neck, and I can feel the full stretch through my back because my hands are grounded like they're intended to be. If you're a little bit less flexible, you can come here or here. Depending where your forward fold is, these blocks can become the ground for you, which I love. Also in balancing poses. For example, for half moon pose, I always need a block. I can't reach the ground. So I reach for the block, my eyes reaching for the block, my foot pushing like it's pushing against a wall, and then my arm can come up. I would not be able to do this without a block because this is providing me some stability to help me balance and bringing the ground closer to me. Blocks can also be used for balance. So say a teacher cues for you to do a balancing mountain. So bring your hands up to upward salute, bring your foot up. If your balance isn't super good, you can use a block to help you practice. So you can lift your foot up. If you start to get wobbly, you can tap down on the block to help you catch your balance. The last is stepping through. So blocks, like I said, they bring the ground closer to you, and they can also create space between your body and the ground. Stepping through is typically cued from downward facing dog. You either lift your right or your left leg up, curl your knee towards your nose, and step in between your hands. That can be very difficult if you have a belly stopping you. So I'm going to show you how to step through by using blocks to create more space between you and the ground. I'm going to start in a downward facing dog with blocks. To be completely honest, I don't typically like to do this. I like the full expression of the pose, so I use an alternate step through method, which I will show you after this. So you have your blocks, you're in downward facing dog, your teacher says left leg towards the sky, knee to nose, step through. So you just step through here, and then lift up. Ta-da! You did it. You can do that on the highest setting, you can do it lower, or at the very bottom. It just depends how much space you need to get your leg through to come up to your hands. So typically I still use a block to be about here, and then I step up into my crescent lunge. Pretty simple, right? But in a class setting, it can be difficult to make sure your blocks are actually where you need them the majority of the time. Teachers like to get creative and have you facing this side of your mat, have you facing this side of your mat. So you could have a set of blocks on each side, but this is what I prefer to do instead. We're in downward facing dog. Lift your right leg up, step through. Instead of stepping through, I come to my knees, I step through, I tuck all 5 of my back toes. I've gotten a stress fracture from only tucking my big toe. So make sure you're tucking all 5 of your toes. All 5 have contact with the ground, then you lift up, meet your class here or here, wherever they are. For me, coming to my knees, stepping through allows me to flow with my class a little bit better. A bonus tip that I get asked pretty often too is for forward folding. So if I'm just a forward fold, you can see the stomach's right here, so it keeps me from reaching, like this. So a way that you can forward fold effectively, if you have a barrier, just like stepping through, like I said, was to bring the ground closer to you with blocks. but also just step a little bit wider. It creates a little pathway for your belly, and then you're able to go right down to the ground. And it's really nice. It's not a big deal. It's not going to change your flow, but it's going to give you that full stretch. So step a little bit wider, create the space for your belly. It's really nice. It feels great. Also, you may need to just tuck your belly. So if you're standing in mountain pose, feet hips width distance apart, you might just need to take your hands, put them right under the fold of your belly, and kind of shimmy, and it's gonna kind of tuck your belly in just a little bit so that you can get down to the ground. Isn't that nice? That feels good, right? So remember, your belly, it's movable. It's not just this thing that's attached, that's immobile. You can move it, and you can also change your stance just a little bit to make things more comfortable. And when you step into a wide leg, it makes it much easier to breathe because you're not compressing your belly. I hope that these tips were helpful for you. Thank you so much for watching, and get out there and do some yoga. I'll talk to you guys really soon. Bye.